It is a real pleasure to be able to introduce our speaker today, Helen Varley Jamieson. Helen is with us at the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at the university as our first international artist in residence. She's going to be telling you all about her work and also a project that she's going to be here with us later in November to undertake called We Have a Situation Coventry. Helen is a digital media artist, a theatre artist, a writer, an incredibly accomplished person. She's also a real pioneer of this type of network practice called cyberformance, and she's going to tell you a little bit about that as well. So I would really like to thank Jess Pinson for hosting us here at the Herbert. Thank you, Jess. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Helen Varley Jamieson.
Thank you, Rochelle, and thank you to Jess at the Herbert. It's really great to be here in Coventry and doing this project. I'm just going to talk a bit about my background and how I came to be here, and a bit also about the We Have a Situation project. And I'm hoping to leave enough time at the end for you to ask questions. So Rochelle is going to give me a strangling kind of gesture when time moves on, because I do get excited about my work. And when I get excited, then I just start ranting. And I think it's really interesting, but I don't know if you will. So I'm starting with this image here that I hope you can all see in our wonderful light atrium. It's a picture of me from a performance called Swim, an exercise in remote intimacy in 2002. And this was a performance that I made with the group Avatar Body Collision. And we were working using the internet to connect the four of us who were in New Zealand and Finland and London to create live performances. And I'm not an actor, I'm a theatre maker, I'm a writer and a kind of a director and producer and all kinds of things, but I am not an actor. And when we made this performance, I hadn't been in a sort of on-stage position for more than a decade. And at a certain point in the process, and it was a networked process, we weren't in the room together, I suddenly realized that I was making a show where I had to stand up and walk across the stage with my laptop on the top of my head at the very beginning of the performance, and then plug my laptop in and do the performance. And if I dropped my laptop, there was not going to be a performance. And at a certain point, I just thought, oh my God, what am I doing? And I like this picture a lot because I never did drop the laptop. We did this performance a lot of times. I never dropped it, and it was like a little test at the beginning of every performance. If I could get across the stage with the laptop on my head, not drop it, everything after that was going to be so easy that it would just be fine. And it always was, miraculously. But the image of myself with my entire life, basically, and my computer balanced on my head, this idea of both precariousness and risk in what we were doing, but also the connection of the technology and the body, is really important to my work. So we might be working remotely over the internet, but the tools that we're using, the actual hardware, is a part of it. It's a part of the costume, of the set. It's another player in the work. So for me, it's a very important image that the computer was on me as part of a costume, as part of my technology, as the tool that I'm working with. So that is just to explain that picture there, and my probably my most terrifying moment ever in my life. So how did I get to that situation of standing there on a stage in front of people with my laptop on my head? I studied theatre at university in New Zealand, and I thought I would be a playwright, a director, a producer. In New Zealand, there's a very small population, so there's a very small arts industry, so there's a very small theatre industry, and there's not very much money for the arts, unless you make theatre about rugby. So I had a day job in the mid-90s working for a company that was making websites. This is quite a normal thing today, but in the mid-90s it was actually the beginning. So I was there hand coding HTML in my day job and then going home at night and making theatre. And I also made websites for theatre groups and festivals and performances and things like this, just very basic little websites back in the day before very many people had that kind of thing. And at a certain point, I started to discover that people were putting their artwork online, putting their show information, but they were also using the internet as a site for live performance. And when I discovered this, I got quite excited because I had known about chat rooms and this kind of thing for a while, and I'd thought, why would I want to go and spend hours talking to someone on the other side of the world I don't know when I don't even have time to see my friends? So chat rooms, yeah, not very interesting. But then I found people making live performance in chat rooms, particularly this group Desktop Theatre that I worked with. And suddenly a whole world of improvisation and playful, imaginative, weird stuff became open to me, and I got really excited about it and started to do it. And after I'd been doing it for a while, I was having a lot of trouble explaining to people what I was doing. So I made up a word that described it, and that word is cyberformance. And then I went on to start to make projects where I could explore what this thing cyberformance really is and work out how to talk about it more with people like you. So just to explain the term cyberformance, it's using the internet technology to bring remote performers together, so the people making the performance are in different places, and in live theatrical performances. So the internet is the site for the performance, and the audience can be anywhere in the world. There's quite a bit of information about it online now. Somebody else other than me made a Wikipedia page, so you can go and look at that and find links if you want to find more. And I also wrote a thesis about it nearly 10 years ago now, and where I came up with a kind of a manifesto for cyberformance. And the attributes of cyberformance are that it's lively, so it is live, as in happening in real time, and it's lively as well. It's very much alive and vibrant and dynamic. It's situated in cyberspace, so I think of the internet as a space where things can happen, where people can meet and discuss and perform. It's distributed, so it's involving more than one physical location. It has attitude. It's interested in thinking critically about the world that we live in and talking about that and asking questions rather than just kind of reflecting back things. It's resourceful. So I'm an independent artist. I'm not employed by a university. I sometimes get grants, but not always. So I use what I have. I have this laptop. I have my bedroom or my living room. I have certain things that I have and other things I don't have. Like I don't have one of these microphones, which would be really handy to have. But I use what I have and I come up with ways around, if I want to do something, how can I do that thing with the resources that I have? It's transparent, so we're not pretending that we're not using these technologies. We're not pretending that we're in a movie. We're not pretending that we're something. We are showing that we might be pretending, but we're not pretending not to pretend, if you get what I mean. And we're not hiding the technology. If things go wrong, they go wrong, and that's part of the performance. It's unfinished. In my understanding of what theatre is, I think of theatre as being unfinished because every time it's performed, there's a different public, different things happen differently, there's a different energy, so you never have a final product like you do, for example, with a film, where you say, okay, a film or a book, that's it and it's finished now and it stays like that. Cyberformance is always evolving. And the last thing is that it's digital. So we're using digital technologies, often in a mix with other non-digital technologies. And it's also digital as in your fingers are digits. So when we're doing a live performance, if you know how in the theatre people say break a leg, we say break a digit. So before the show, everybody's writing to each other in whatever chat we're using, break a digit. So just quickly, a few examples of some of the early work that I was doing. If you can see it, I hope it is okay for those of you at the back. We were using a chat application called the Palace, which was built in '95, and it was, I think, the first graphic sonic chat application. So it had little avatar characters, which you can see a couple of them here in the picture, that could be moved around like a digital puppet. And it also had sounds, computerized voices, and a whole lot of sound effects and things that you could do. So this in '95 was actually quite advanced. If you compare it to something like Second Life, okay, there's a whole lot more you can do with Second Life, but the concept is really quite similar. And we were doing performances in these environments where we were often going into a public chat space. So you could think of it as like walking into a bar and getting up on the bar and doing a performance and then walking out again. We were entering into chat rooms where people were just hanging out socially and doing spontaneous theatrical things and then going away. And I also, in 2001, with this particular performance, I presented it at a theatre festival to an audience of theatre makers for the first time, and got questioned about whether or not it was theatre because there was no body and people were kind of in a screen somewhere. So for the theatre audience of 2001, it was really difficult to accept that this could be considered within the spectrum of theatre and performance. So then I went back to New Zealand and did the ABC experiment, where I got a bunch of people together from around the world and did a sort of research performance in a theatre space again, again using the Palace and these combination of physical performance in the space and this kind of avatar sort of digital puppet performance online. And one of the people who saw that said that it was like he imagined it must have been when they had radio for the first time. There were lots of things that were very awkward and clunky and bumpy, but it felt very exciting because it was a kind of a glimpse at what was possible. Then we formed the group Avatar Body Collision, and with these other three artists that I mentioned before, we made the performance where I had my laptop on the top of my head. We made 10 performances over 5 years. We were an unfunded, independent artist group working out of our living rooms and bedrooms in London and Helsinki and various places in New Zealand, and doing a lot of experimenting with how we could use the free chat software that was available to us to make performances. So we used the Palace, which was the one that I showed you before, and we also used something called iVisit, which was like a precursor to Skype, really. And I think it still exists and probably is as good, if not better, than Skype for a lot of things. So in this picture, you can see there are webcam windows that were the four of us and one person on a stage. So this was a performance that was made for what we call a proximal audience, a group of audience in a physical location together to see on a screen and with a person, and people on the screen who are in other places and coming in to do part of the performance. And we did another one called Dress the Nation that was purely in the Palace. So this was for an online audience who were anywhere in the world, not in a physical space. And so our audience were actually other people with avatars in the Palace, and they are all the figures that are down here in the bottom corner. They are the audience, and the one called Web Dog. And then the performers are the politicians. So this was a political piece about the invasion of Iraq by the US in 2003, and we were playing different political characters. And we learned from this that when we had our audience on stage with us, it became quite problematic when they knew how to do things in the Palace environment. Like it was possible for them to completely wipe away all our scenery that we'd carefully drawn and prepared. So we were discovering and negotiating this dynamic where you have online audience that are in fact on the stage with you and are really participating in the performance. This is Swim, an exercise in remote intimacy, which is the one where I walked with the laptop on my head. And in this image, you can see how we arranged what we called screenography. So instead of scenography that you have in a theatre performance, we had screenography, which was the screen behind the performer on the stage. And in this one, we are using both the palace, which is the one in the middle, and iVisit, which are the 4 webcam images around the side. And during the performance, I would move them into different positions according to what was happening in the performance. So people were asking us how could they watch this online, but they couldn't because they wouldn't know how to do what I needed to do to make this screenography. They would have to have 2 different chat applications. They would have to know how to find us. They would have to know so much before they could actually receive the performance that it was just really impractical. So with Avatar Body Collision, we were starting to fantasize about making our own software that would take the things that we really liked from these chat applications and put them into one interface that could be really accessible to an audience. And by this time, which was 2002, we were thinking, okay, if it's something that works in a web browser, this is something that's really easy for people to click on a link and open some kind of digital stage in their web browser. So we came up with the idea for a platform that's called Upstage, and we developed it in 2003. And since 2004, it has been being used for performances, for cyberformance all around the world by all kinds of different people. And it is still going today, and it's what we're going to be using in a couple of weeks when we have a situation in Coventry. It is kind of an antique now. So it's 12 years old, nearly 13 years old. And for a piece of internet software, this is really, really ancient, which means that there are lots of things that are becoming difficult about it. It's very difficult for us to maintain it, and we are now at the point where we have to just completely start again because the technology has changed so much. But the fact that it has lasted so long and been so actively used over this time is really gratifying for all the work that we have put into it over the years. It's really needed, and there's not many other things out there that are similar to it. So it allows players, as we call them, or artists, who are wherever they are in the world, to collaborate in real time with a whole variety of digital media, including live audio and video streams, but also text chat, computerized voices, live drawing, pre-prepared graphics and animations, pre-prepared audio. So you create a whole kind of suite of material for your show, and then you manipulate it in real time to create something that's a kind of a cross between a live cartoon, a bit of live cinema. It's really a genre of its own because it incorporates so many different elements. And that is what we can do in Upstage. And the audience who are watching it can chat in real time in this chat on the right-hand side. So the audience are really actively involved in the performance. And it may seem like quite a simplistic thing to have a chat, but when you're there in the moment and the performance is unfolding and you're responding or chatting with someone else in the audience, it's incredibly engaging and a lot of fun. If you want to know more about Upstage, you can go and have a look at the website. There's a lot of information there. There's some documentation about past performances. And there's also, we had from 2007 to 2012, we had a festival every year with performances by people all over the world. And we'll just switch to this to just give you an idea of the breadth of it. We counted up one time all the people that had been involved, and it built up every year. These are all the different countries, the numbers of shows and of artists approximately. And in the final year, that was 12, we had over 100 artists involved and all of these countries that were doing shows or showing shows. We had what we called real-life access nodes, which were places where people just made a screening presentation of the festival performances for a proximal audience, which was another really interesting kind of aspect. We weren't always just performing for an online audience, we were also performing for these gathered audiences as well. So if you're interested in that, you can go and have a look, and there are some videos on Vimeo that have little excerpts from the performances. So this has all been very experimental work, and mostly, as I said, we were doing it without any real support. We were just trying out what we could do with the resources that we had. And this is something that artists have always done. Whenever a new technology comes along, artists are always taking it and looking at it and trying to do something different with it, trying to hack it or critiquing it and questioning it. And it's what I see as one of the roles of the artist in society is to have this function of, on the one hand, helping people to adapt to new technology, to get familiar with it and be able to use it, but also very much to critique it and to ask, how is this technology helping us or not? What does it mean to our lives? And is it a good thing or a bad thing, or how can we use it in a way that does make sure that it is actually benefiting us? And then I started to think about this in relation to my own work as well, like, okay, here I am sitting in my bedroom doing really weird things with a few people around the world, and a few people are watching it. But, you know, apart from me being artistically satisfied, what am I actually doing in terms of my social contribution to the world? Is this Cyberformance thing really interesting, or is it just me that likes it? What's it about? What can it do? And so I started to think about the world that we're living in now, the things like social media and the proliferation of technologies and how that is impacting our lives. Is it making us have more or better communication with each other? Do we have better relationships with our families because we can talk to them on Skype? Or does it mean that we actually don't talk so much because we're just busy putting stuff on Facebook that makes us look like we're really cool? So these are some of the things that I started to think about, and I started to recognise in my work that there is a very big opportunity for conversation with very diverse people. And so a lot of my work in the last sort of 6-7 years has been looking at creating conversations within these performances. So I will give you just one example before I talk about We Have a Situation, and then that will be a bit more relevant, especially for those of you who are going to be participating in it with us. So the first one I want to talk about is a project called Makeshift that I did from 2010 to 2012 with Paula Crutchlow, who is an artist down in Exeter working in theatre and dance and new technologies. And in this performance, we described it as an intimate networked performance and discussion event that reimagines the private actions of our domestic lives as multiple, interconnected, and with global consequences. So we were using Upstage with live audio-video streams, and we were connecting 2 living rooms together and an online audience. So Paula and I were each in somebody's house somewhere in the world. Paula was usually in England, and I was in all kinds of different places, from New Zealand to India to the USA to Serbia to France to all kinds of different places. And in each living room we had an audience of maybe 8 to 10 people, depending on the size of the living room, sometimes smaller, who were co-authoring this piece of work with us. So they were doing things like holding the webcam or helping us to arrange things to make the performance. And we asked everybody to bring their plastic recycling rubbish with them, to collect it for 24 hours and bring it with them to the performance. Because our theme was around consumption and disposability, and in particularly we ended up looking at plastics and the never-ending increasing excess of plastic, particularly single-use disposable plastic, and what happens to it after we throw it away. So it was happening simultaneously in the 2 living rooms and online and Upstage. And we chose to situate it in the living rooms for a number of reasons. One was quite practical, because we didn't have very much money, so we couldn't rent theatres or things like this, and we thought, well, we'll use people's houses. The other thing was we really wanted people to think about their own lives and their own domestic situations in relation to the topic. And so having it in somebody's house helped that environment to be there. You felt like you were just sitting around with friends talking. And it was also building on the idea of the salon, where you have an event in somebody's house that is social and relaxed, but also curated and with a kind of a purpose. It was real-time co-authored by us with the participants, and it was around consumption and disposability. People had to bring their plastic, and this was a really interesting exercise just for them to do that. We had one woman in London who had taken delivery of a new double bed mattress that day, and she had this big plastic cover from the mattress, and she had to pack it in a really big, it was one of those stripy bags. What are they called? Those big plastic stripy bags with a zip and a handle, and it was really like this big. And she had to carry it on the tube to come to our performance. And she said the whole way on the tube, she was conscious of this bundle of plastic that she was going to throw out. And that, you know, carrying it with her was a really good kind of exercise in thinking about where is it going to go. It's been used once to wrap this plastic. But what we did in the performance was we made kites out of the plastic. So we did something creative with it. And we also had a virtual character in the performance called Dave, and I think we get to see him now, I hope. There we go. And in upstage we had little avatars. These are the characters that were myself and Paula, who appeared in the same costumes that we were wearing in the houses, and we were playing ourselves as these digital puppets. And then we had this guy, Dave, in a suit, and he was quite an outspoken kind of character who said a lot of really sort of right-wing business person kind of individualistic sort of sometimes quite offensive things. And he generated a whole lot of discussion amongst the online audience in the chat about who he was and his opinions, and people really believed that he was a real person playing himself. And he was actually operated by me and Paula. So this is something in Upstage, we can operate multiple characters like you can if you have a puppet show. But he was a virtual character that served a purpose of being very provocative, and then had a kind of existential crisis during the performance and came out the other side as a changed person. And then on the side here where we've got the webcams, the top one was Paula's living room and the bottom one was my living room. So we could see things that were going on, which was sometimes people doing the activities, or sometimes very curated and staged scenes that we created in the webcams. And I've just got a few pictures here that show you when the people were building their kites. So what I want you to get the idea of here is how I'm making work that is using digital technologies and seen over the internet and participated in by people in a very technological way, as it were. But I'm always bringing it back to the physical and to the material things, and the kind of real and virtual are very much pushed together to see what happens and how we talk differently about both things when we put them together. So we collected a lot of kites, and we had a lot of people in the online audience who also made kites and sent us their pictures of their kites, and we made lots of nice collages of images of all of these kites. And it was a very important way to involve the online audience, because when you're working with an audience who's in front of you like we are now, as well as an audience who's somewhere out there in the ether, it can be very easy to forget about them and to just leave them looking through a keyhole, as it were, while we're doing something interesting here. So with Makeshift, Paula and I really consciously thought all the time about the things that were happening in the house and what did that mean for the people who were watching online. So the gathering of the plastic material and making the kites was something that they could be really involved in, and they did get into that. And with this work in particular, people really responded afterwards about how they had changed their habits, how they had much more consciously thought about what they were buying and about using less packaging and this kind of thing. And it was something that they would think about and discuss about for quite a long time afterwards. So this is what I'm thinking with my work. How can I make these kind of changes? How can I provoke people to think about quite practical things in a different way? That's just another shot of the audience in Brisbane at the end of the performance doing their dance. So that brings me to, we have a situation. How am I doing for time, is it? Okay. Okay. So we have a situation, was the next project I did after Makeshift, and I used a lot of those ideas and a lot of the things that I'd learned from about how I could involve different audiences in different places and actually get them to try and talk together. And we got some European funding, and I was working with 4 different organisations around Europe in 2013 to sort of try out this idea. And we wanted to come up with a way to explore a really important local issue, and a local issue, not something, you know, like too big and scary for people to really engage with, but something that we could talk about in very concrete terms, and how we could make a conversation between these local people with this issue and some online people who are watching who maybe have similar issues or maybe don't. And can we find, is there something interesting in this discussion? Are we going to find something out about this issue and about how people respond to it? So it's kind of like the idea of a problem shared as a problem solved, or about bringing new perspectives and how we can use the internet as a way to facilitate those conversations. So I've done 5 now. They were in London, where we looked at e-waste, in Nantes, where we looked at aviation recycling, Eindhoven, we looked at migration, and in Graz, we looked at industrial farming. And last year, I was in Rio de Janeiro, and we looked at water pollution, which was a really great topic there, because obviously it was during the build-up to the Olympic Games, where a lot of the sports events would be held in this really horribly polluted water. So we had a local situation there that was a very long-term problem for the local people, but also becoming a very internationally interesting problem. And I will show you a little clip from that in a minute. And now, this year in Coventry, we're going to be looking at the relationship between the university and the city, which, depending on your perspective, whether you're a student or someone who lives here or both, you will all have very different ideas about it. And some people will have very negative experiences about how the university has changed the city. Others of you may have never even thought about it, because you just come here to go to university and then you leave and you don't really know Coventry. So this kind of social dynamic is something that's quite unique to Coventry, but there are also many other places in the world where quite a similar situation exists. For example, my hometown of Dunedin in New Zealand is also a similar sized town, maybe a bit smaller, with a university that in the last sort of 20, 30 years has really exploded to take over the centre of town. So there are a lot of social dynamics that we're going to be exploring with this one. I've got a few pictures here, which, and most of them I think I'm going to show you the audience that was of participants in a local space. So here we are at Furtherfield Gallery in London, and you can see there's a projection of what's happening online, and there's also people who are doing things in the space. So the online people are seeing what's being projected there, which is, well, you can see it in the background there. I think I've got a shot of it here. So the online people would see this and be able to talk in Upstage. The people in London had one view, and for this we also had people in Graz who were watching and then came on at the end for the discussion. So we're managing these 3 different spaces with 3 different audiences, and it's quite complex, but when it works, it's quite exciting. Then we went to Nantes in France, and we were looking at aviation recycling. I never knew anything about this before, but there's a whole industry of dismantling planes and recycling them, and they recycle actually an enormous amount. But we were looking at a lot of different environmental issues around aviation. And we also had audiences there in the space who got to eat the cake. We had a cake in the shape of a plane, which we dismantled and recycled by eating. And we had a multi-screen sort of installation for the people in the space in Nantes, which obviously the people online didn't have quite the same experience of that, but they had other things that they could do, like the chatting. In Eindhoven, we developed a game that was called Peopoly, and it was about migration. So we had a student, a tourist, and a refugee who had to try and enter and interact with the highlights of Eindhoven. And after that, we had a really interesting discussion between France and Netherlands and Graz about visas and movement within Europe and wider. And, you know, is marrying for a visa the same as falling in love was one of the questions that came up there. Then in Graz, which was also the situation that Rochelle participated in, here we were looking at the situation of industrial farming, which is in some of these European countries and probably also in the UK, really destroying small farmers and just making everything into a monoculture. And we had a golden pig money bank that was our little character that you'll see in some of the pictures, that we also had in a video at times, moving around, breaking out of its cage and going on a journey into outer space to try and find a better life. And that's a screen grab from the discussion at the end. Then we come to Rio de Janeiro, which have I got time to show? There's a little video of 6 minutes. I've only got 5 minutes before we have time for questions, or do you want to see the video or do you want to see the pictures? Video? Okay. Just go quickly. So the video is an edited version of the screen recording. Whoops. Oh, I went right past it. So one of the things that we always have to do is deal with translation, because we're working across different languages. Obviously in Brazil they speak Portuguese, but you can see that people were translating it into English in the chat. And you can see that all the time people are talking in the chat. So as the performance is going on, there's a whole commentary coming up here that might be people adding their own contributions to the content, or they might be asking technical questions, or all kinds of things that come up there, and it's a whole other kind of performance of itself. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the kind of aesthetic of a collage of different kinds of material that's been created in the space of a week, or less than a week even. That was from a Monday to Friday, with a group of people coming in with a lot of ideas about their own perspectives on the topic. And also in that particular one, I was working with 5 people online as well as the people in the space. So we had a whole diverse lot of different material that we had to pull into a kind of a story as a performance for the people in the theatre in Rio de Janeiro, but also online as well. And I'm sorry about the quality of it, but if you really want to see it again, it is of course online, and you can go and have a look at it, slightly better quality. So just to wrap up there, I would just mention a couple of book chapters that I've got coming out, where I've been, in the first one, looking at this process and of creating these situations in relation to civic engagement in post-democracy, and looking at how the kind of activism that we have online with petitions and sharing things on social media is, I don't know if you've heard the term clicktivism, but this kind of idea that we're now just, you click and then your conscience is appeased and you feel like you've done something, but it's not really making a difference because we don't live in a democracy anymore. So looking at how we're using these kind of technologies in different ways to actually engage and make a difference. And the other book chapter is about the process of networked collaboration. So it's quite different to the one that's more about what I'm trying to achieve with it. It's about how we're doing it. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, those books are coming out at the end of this year and next year. And that's it. You can ask me questions if you want.